This is Garis, Masculist, MGTOW flyers, that is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 316, entitled Becoming Biconscious is Actually Liberating for Feminists. Description. This flyer claims that feminists can liberate themselves more by becoming biconscious, that is, having both their feminist and their masculist consciousness raised. The two main benefits of doing this are that biconscious feminists tend to lose their gender bias, their anger bias, and hence become calmer, less stressed, which is better for their longer-term health. And the other is that biconscious feminists tend to be less feminazi bitchy, so are more likely to have boyfriends to give them their attention and their penises. The flyer then talks about how to educate women to become more biconscious. The flyer itself. Becoming biconscious is actually liberating for feminists, by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Just a minute, let me get it a little smaller. Okay. There are at least two important ways in which feminists can liberate themselves more by becoming biconscious, that is, having their feminist and their masculist consciousnesses raised. One way is they lose their gender bias, their anger bias, by becoming less angry at the way men oppress women, at the injustice that feminists feel from this. Their greater calm and peace of mind generated by losing their gender bias, their anger bias, is actually better for their long-term health, that is, de-stressing. The other way is that once feminists become female masculists as well, that is, becoming aware of how women oppress men, then they get angry at women for oppressing men, feeling the injustice that men feel against women's oppression of men. These two oppositely directed oppressions generate two oppositely directed angers, which tend to cancel each other out. This will make biconscious feminists less feminazi bitchy, and hence be more approachable, more likeable, less dislikable by men. So biconscious feminists are more likely to have a boyfriend who is probably also biconscious, partly because he is male and hence has absorbed masculist ideas, as well as having been taught by his feminist girlfriend how it feels as a woman to be oppressed by men. Thus, biconscious feminists benefit on two major counts. One is that their longer-term health improves because sustained anger is bad for the nervous system. Sustained anger creates sustained stress, which is bad for the heart, leading to heart disease, clogged arteries and veins that cause heart attacks later in life. The other major benefit is that biconscious feminists are usually happier because they get to have a man in their lives who gives them his attention and his penis, making these feminists more contented women, and contentment is also beneficial for health. Let us assume now that the above reasoning is accepted by the masculists, but is accepted much less so by the feminists, the monoconscious kind of feminists, who have strongly imbibed the idea that men are evil, toxic, the oppressors of women. So to such one-eyed feminazis, any critique coming from men, specifically from masculists who attack the fluffies and fluffy feminists, is merely seen as further proof that men oppress women by men criticizing women. To a strongly brainwashed feminazi, who often is not very bright, with a poor ability to abstract, to put herself in the shoes of a man, or with even greater difficulty into the shoes of a masculist, there's probably not much point in trying to persuade her that women oppress men too, and that it might be in her self-interest to learn some masculist ideas so that she understands how women oppress men. For example, with female financial parasitism, female manslavery, the fluffy feminist hypocrisy in the divorce courts, financially massacring and ruining the lives of one father in 4. Women's hypogamous nature, seeing men as sexploitable protein/money providers. The sadistic childishness of divorcing fluffies who are coldly indifferent to their ex-husbands, treating them as cash machines to be sexploited and abused by fluffy feminist-controlled divorce court lawyers and judges, etc., etc. So what should masculists do to encourage the more moderate, more open-minded and usually brighter feminists to become biconscious? Question mark. The key word here is education. The masculists have a major task ahead of themselves in attempting to educate the general public into masculist principles and ideas. One of my personal goals this year, 2019, is to approach the broadcast media and teach them about masculism so that individual journalists become influenced by masculist thinking, become inspired so that masculism ideas change their individual lives, motivating them to spread their new ideas via the power they have of the written or spoken word that gets transmitted via their media to the masses, the millions. Journalists are powerful people. They have the power to influence the minds of the peakers, that is, the average people, who are not original thinkers. Typically, the progression of ideas usually starts with a few isolated intellectuals/sages who dream up their profoundly original ideas, who then write their books and publish their thoughts, directing them at other sages, other intellectuals, hoping to influence them. Gradually, the number of sages who become aware of these new ideas grows, so that this minority of sages begins to influence the more intelligent and open-minded of the journalists, who then absorb the new ideas and finally write about them or make TV documentaries, etc. This is the second stage. The third stage is when the ideas become mainstream, as the less intelligent, less pioneering journalists jump on the bandwagon as they see that the new ideas are becoming hot, that is, popular, so that they feel motivated to add their own 2 cents worth before the train leaves the station without them. Once the general public becomes more informed about masculist ideas, the more moderate women will pick up on the ideas, and some of them will sympathise with men's plight, especially in the divorce courts and the lack of a legislated paternity rejection right. Although many women will remain profoundly hypocritical when it comes to the thinking that it's fine for women to have the marrow, but men have to pay women to have babies, so the should be opposed by women, totally ignoring the utter hypocrisy of this one-eyed feminazi viewpoint. As the journalists spread the masculist word, more men will become masculists and put a lot more moral pressure on women to fip up, to accept the to bother to get a career-competent education at high school, etc. Those women who fail to adapt to this growing masculist moral pressure and masculist critique of female hypocrisy regarding women giving up their privileges in the divorce courts will go through a lot of pain, as tens of millions of them in the Western countries are rejected by men for not having their masculist consciousness raised. Masculist journalists can make an appeal to women, and particularly to feminists, that it's in their self-interest to become biconscious for the reasons given above. Journalists of both sexes could do this. Some women will become female masculists for the same kind of reason that some men became male feminists, that is, purely out of sympathy for the plight of the other sex. Another approach that could be taken by the journalists is to appeal to the self-interest of women, particularly monoconscious feminists, by telling them that many men are going MGTOW, men going their own way, due to the toxicity of the divorce courts taken over by the hated, by masculists, fluffy feminist hypocrites who behave as feminists in the parliaments, pushing for equal rights for women, but as fluffy parasites in the divorce courts, expecting to be able to continue to parasite off men's money after the divorce as they did before the divorce. As more and more men wake up to the idea that marriage is toxic because divorce is toxic due to the fluffy feminist hypocrites, then women will be subject to enormous moral pressure and criticism from men to fip up and grow up, to take responsibility for their own lives, and not expect to have some gullible manslave solve their female financial problems for them. Women are herd animals, sheeple, who go much more readily than men do with the flow of the female herd. If the top 10% of women take up female masculism, the rest will follow, because that is in the nature of women. They do not have original ideas on the whole, relying on the ideas of others, often from men, who have nearly all the original ideas. So if women do not want to be ostracized by men, by society, then they'll be forced to adapt to the masculist tide, or pay a very heavy price that is being rejected by nearly any quality man they try to attract, to have a relationship with, or to have a baby with. In time, monoconscious women will have a very hard time not being part of the flow of general society-wide bi-consciousness. Another longer-term reason why women will need to become bi-conscious is that otherwise their lives might be at risk. The current destruction of the lives of a quarter of fathers in the hated, fluffy, feminist, hypocrite-dominated divorce courts cannot continue. No culture that destroys the lives of a quarter of its fathers can survive. Men will snap. Men will become murderously angry and go to war against the social forces that oppress them, against the gender politicians, assassinating them, against feminazi divorce court lawyers and judges, murdering them in their thousands, and even go out into the streets shooting feminazi vermin, since responsible males, masculist soldiers, will not tolerate that the feminazi bitches are indirectly wiping out whole populations. Men will simply shoot them first in the sex war. So, women need to become bi-conscious for their own safety, their own lives. Things cannot continue with the current gender status quo. I know from my own experience how much more militant I become in my thinking as I become increasingly aware that the current abuse of men in the divorce courts, the hypocrisy of women regarding the para, etc., is radicalizing me, making me think that a sex war is coming if women don't become bi-conscious. So, for all the above reasons, it is in women's and feminist self-interest to become bi-conscious. It's also in men's, in masculist self-interest, that women become bi-conscious. Because if, say, 10% of women become female masculists as a result of becoming bi-conscious, then combined with the bloc male vote, there'll be about 60% of voters to force the gender politicians to men-fair the gender laws, to men-fair the divorce courts, bring in the para, put pressure on women to fip up and help create a FIP society, to systematically remove men-unfair gender laws across the board, etc. It's very much in the self-interest of the masculists to educate women into the principles of masculism, so that women vote with men to men-fair the gender laws. If women don't vote with men in this way, then the gender politicians will probably not bother with men's gender problems through fear of losing the female bloc vote. But if a non-negligible proportion of women vote together with men to men-fair the gender laws, then it will happen. So masculists need to put nearly as much effort and energy into educating women as they do men into masculist ideas. As for myself, I see my main task this year is to try to crack the media with masculist concepts, to educate the general public, the masses, the millions, to get gender laws changed, and to do that requires education. Since nearly everyone is either zero conscious, that is, having not even had one's feminist consciousness raised, or mono-conscious, that is, have only had one's feminist consciousness raised. A lot of masculist educational work needs to be done. For this purpose, as an educational tool, I have written the planet's first masculist textbook, including many psychological insights from the MGTOW, MGTOW, that's men going their own way, movement, who differ from the masculists in being politically passive, preferring to quietly walk away from marriage and paternity, and often from women, period. Masculists, on the other hand, are distinct from the politically wimpy MGTOWs, are angry, are political, are fighters, who harangue feminazi bitches to their face, who lobby the gender politicians, who educate the media, etc. Masculists are politically active. With this text, I can provide the means for individual male journalists, and who knows, maybe some female journalists, to be able to educate themselves into masculist ideas, hundreds of ideas, in a very large book containing hundreds of flyers like this one. I've done this sort of media blitzing before, in the early 80s in Europe, getting on the media about 150 times in 4 languages, English, French, Dutch, German, in 7 countries. So I have the experience, but this time it will be harder because so many journalists are now women who are monoconscious and who will interpret any masculist criticism of women as further examples of male oppression of women. So that barrier needs to be overcome. What is working in my favour is the fact that there are thousands of media outlets in a large city such as Melbourne, Australia, with its 5 million people. It has been my experience one only has to get a few media people to bite, and then the rest will follow. After the first nibbles, usually a major journalist sees the light and writes a major cover story or article, and then the floodgates open. Once that happens, the millions get the message, which is the whole point. Without public opinion strongly in favour of society becoming biconscious, there will not be much in the way of easing men's gender plight. Women need to be made biconscious so that men can be liberated from the oppression of the traditional male role and from the massive injustices committed against men in the divorce courts. No para, etc. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. In brackets, contains links to 300 plus YouTube masculist essays/videos and to the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Man-Slaves to Women, an e-textbook of 300 plus masculist flyers for men's studies courses. Ciao.